Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, as more hostages are set free, there's talk the current ceasefire may be extended once again. Amid concerns, Hamas is regrouping and getting ready for its next round of battles against the United States. Here at home, a political battle over U.S. aid for Israel. Some Democrats calling for conditions on Israel for any future help, while other Democrats and Republicans oppose that idea. As Hamas unleashed brutal attacks on unsuspecting Israelis on October 7th, some fought back. We're going to hear from one man who's being called a hero for his actions on that dark day. And more stories have come out about those deadly terrorist attacks, and for many, they can be difficult to hear. We're going to have a look at how you can protect yourself from feeling traumatized by these stories while staying informed. All those stories and more ahead today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
Let's begin this half hour in Israel with the latest round of hostages released and the possibility that a ceasefire may be extended so that more may be set free. At the same time, the stories are coming out about just how those hostages had been treated while they were being held in Gaza. And amid all this, Israel is preparing for its next round of attacks on Hamas. CBN's Paul Strand brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Hamas freed 12 more hostages, while Israel let 30 more Palestinian prisoners go free on the 5th day of a ceasefire in the war in Gaza. That ceasefire is due to end on Wednesday, its 6th day, but negotiators are hoping for another extension. Word's getting out how hostage children were treated. The aunt of one child who's been freed says their captors forced them to watch videos of the October 7th massacres and ordered them to stop crying at gunpoint. She also says they beat the children. The father of 9-year-old freed hostage Emily Hand says she cries uncontrollably, and her captors made her stay so quiet she can now only whisper. In Israel, a medical official overseeing freed hostages described the condition and the spirit of the adult females among them.
A group of extraordinary women that endure the hardships of their captivity in a remarkable fashion.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration is leaning on Israel to go easier on southern Gaza than it has on the north when fighting resumes. The White House points out millions of Gazans fled south when the Israeli military attacked the north, so there's really nowhere else for those civilians to go. Surveys like AP polling show Americans still backing Israel, but worrying about non-combatants in Gaza.
The American people are broadly supportive of Israel's right to defend itself. There's also growing concern for the plight of civilians in Gaza.
But since Hamas hides out among civilians, that could make it almost impossible for Israel to achieve its goal of destroying Hamas. A goal Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told troops fighting in Gaza they must achieve if Israelis are ever to feel safe and secure again. In another development, Germany and the European Union are freezing funding for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA. Its education programs for millions of Palestinian youth over the years are accused of teaching antisemitism and glorifying terrorism. A report by the watchdog group UNWatch profiles 118 UNRWA-educated Palestinians who went on to commit terrorist acts against Israel. The same report also shows a number of UNRWA teachers or workers celebrating the October 7th massacres. One said of the brutal attacks, "This is an unforgettable, glorious morning." Israel is fighting back with more than guns, tanks, and jets. There's also prayer. The Knesset, Israel's parliament, was the site of a Wednesday prayer meeting. Many Christians joined their Jewish brothers and sisters to pray.
There are literally tens of millions, probably more, of conservative Christians, let's say Christians who take the Bible and its message seriously, who still see the difference between good and evil.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem with more. So, Chris, we're going to certainly talk about the prayer event in a moment. But first, international mediators are trying to get the ceasefire extended again. Will this give Hamas leaders and forces a chance to regroup and possibly relocate at other parts of Gaza that Israel hasn't yet hit?
Yeah, ever since the ceasefire began, Ephraim, that was the concern of many, exactly what advantage this would give to Hamas during this 4-day, now 6-day ceasefire. Could be even longer, that they could regroup, rearm, reposition themselves, perhaps set up more booby traps for IDF soldiers. And that was really the calculus many of these, the war cabinet in particular, had to make, and other Israeli leaders. You certainly want to get all of the hostages out and as many as possible But while you're doing that, you're also putting the IDF soldiers, once the war does resume, they put them at great risk. So Hamas is definitely using this this respite to get together and prepare for the next round of fighting. And also, Ephraim, we've reported on this before. The IDF actually agreed not to surveil Gaza Strip for 6 hours each day of this ceasefire, and that gives Hamas another opportunity to do what they can to prepare for the next round of fighting.
Is it also possible for the IDF to be using the ceasefire to its advantage to plan its next assault on Hamas?
It's exactly what they're doing, and they've said so. In fact, yesterday there was a report from the IDF, and the Chief of Staff, General Halavi, said that they're pre-positioning, they're doing what they can, they're reviewing what's happened in the last several weeks of fighting, learning lessons from that. In fact, there was a meeting yesterday of many of the officers just to go over what's happened in the last several weeks in anticipation when the war resumes, using those lessons, to fight more effectively, to protect their troops, as well as to protect civilians during this time. So both sides, both Hamas and the IDF, are using this time to prepare for the next military round of fighting. And I would add this one thing, Ephraim, there's actually been talk, a possibility of saying we'll release all the hostages for a total ceasefire. That certainly is not going to be acceptable here in Israel.
We began this coverage today with Paul Strand, and he mentioned that Hamas's treatment of hostages is extremely difficult. What else have you learned?
Well, exactly what Paul had in his story. It's really horrific. You couldn't believe these young children, old women, elderly, even babies, 4-year-olds. They were traumatized horrifically on October 7th. And then that treatment seemed to continue. They had to watch the horrific video of October 7th. I watched that, and Ephraim and I wouldn't want to watch that again. Mm-hmm. And then they were told that they couldn't cry at gunpoint. And that's just psychological terror. On the other hand, Ephraim, as we saw these hostages being released, we saw that the Hamas terrorists that were accompanying them to their vehicles, to wave. And actually, they were telling them, make sure they wave. All the while that they had just gone through this horrific, torture and privation for almost 60 days.
We've also been reporting that Germany is pulling its funding from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA. Why is this significant?
Ephraim, that's a huge development because Germany and the EU have been massive funders of UNRWA, which is the United Nations Relief Works Agency, which is specifically for Palestinian refugees, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also here in the West Bank. And many people believe UNRWA is the problem, part of the problem, not the solution, because they have been indoctrinating generations of Palestinians to hate Israel. In fact, many members of Hamas, of UNRWA in Gaza Strip, are members of Hamas. So they're not a fair. Let me just add, I'll show you this. This is a 5th grade curriculum. And this lady is named Dula Mughrabi. She's responsible for one of the worst terror attacks in Israel's history. In 1978, they killed 34 Israelis, including a number of children. So UNRWA just perpetuates this idea of Israel is the enemy. Israel needs to be eradicated. So to have Germany do this is a big development, and I would expect that other donor nations may follow suit.
What can you tell us about the prayer gathering in the Israeli Knesset today?
Well, first of all, Ephraim, that's why I'm so well dressed today with a tie. It was a wonderful event, and it was spurred by the Jerusalem prayer breakfast movement that have been, gathering prayer for Jerusalem for a number of years now. Also sponsored by one of the members of Knesset, and she felt it was just so important that Israel take time, that the leadership of the country, many members of Knesset were there to take time to pray and seek the Lord and find help from the Almighty. And as we heard there in that clip from Rabbi Adelstein, they are very heartened by the fact that there are millions of Christians around the world who are praying for them, and that really is heartening. And that's part of what was happening today at the Knesset.
Nice. And as you mentioned prayer, we are certainly praying for you and our entire CBN News team there in Jerusalem. Chris Mitchell, thank you so much. Here at home, lawmakers on Capitol Hill still can't agree on an aid package to provide assistance for both Israel and Ukraine. But there's only 3 weeks left to get it done this year. And some Democrats are calling for conditions on any additional aid to Israel, while other Democrats and Republicans are pushing back. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has more on this story from Washington.
The issues lawmakers are grappling over range from arguments over Israel's war in Gaza to U.S. immigration reform and border security. While a majority of lawmakers agree aid to our allies is critical, there doesn't appear to be a clear path forward.
We passed the bipartisan Israel support package out of the House a while ago. It's been sitting on this in the Senate and on Chuck Schumer's desk, and so we are encouraging him to get that done.
Speaking in Florida Monday, House Speaker Mike Johnson said he believes Congress will reach an agreement before the holidays, but as two separate packages.
What we've said is that if there is to be additional assistance to Ukraine, which most members of Congress believe is important, we have to also work in changing our own border policy. And so there's been a lot of thoughtful negotiation ongoing with that. I think most of our Senate colleagues recognize that those two things need to move together.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, however, wrote to fellow Democrats Sunday that he plans to bring a national security package to the floor as soon as next week, tying Israel and Ukraine funding together. That bill would also address border security and a number of other foreign policy issues. Meanwhile, Democrats also face pressure from lawmakers critical of Israel's war in Gaza. During a recent media gathering, President Biden said the question of aid to Israel with conditions was, quote, a worthwhile thought. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan clarified that statement on NBC's Meet the Press, saying the current U.S. approach is working.
The approach that he is taking, direct presidential diplomacy behind closed doors with the Israelis and with our Arab partners, that's what's generating the kinds of results that we're seeing right now. That's the course that he's on.
As negotiations in Congress continue, Ralph Reed of the Faith and Freedom Coalition and more than a dozen evangelical leaders sent a letter urging lawmakers to stand with Israel and against anti-Semitism.
We just felt that as faith leaders, we could not remain silent. So it's a very comprehensive call to Congress to pass an immediate aid package to Israel as Israel is under attack and is fighting a war for its very survival.
Another sticking point centers around how these aid packages will be funded. Republicans proposed cuts to IRS funding, something Democrats are not expected to back. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, Hamas killed 1,200 Israelis during their brutal sneak attacks on October 7th, but many citizens also fought back. We're going to bring you the story of one of those heroes when we come back. Although the horror of the Hamas attacks on Israel's border communities on October 7th have scarred many Israelis, stories of courage that saved many lives on that terrible day have also come to light. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl spoke with one who is credited with saving an entire community.
This beautiful field school in the hills of Judea is normally a place for groups to enjoy nature. Since early October, however, it's been home to some 350 Israelis forced to flee their community after October 7th.
A few bombs fell near the houses near us, which caused a lot of damage. And afterwards, it got kind of quiet for a few minutes. And I looked at my wife, and with our eyes, I told her that something is not right. It's not the usual attacks.
These families may look like they're having a fun vacation in a beautiful nature reserve. In reality, they're some of those that have fled from their homes near the Gaza Strip.
We got a phone call for our security team from a family from pre-gun. And he said outside his house there are 7 terrorists who are waiting to get into his house.
Yedidya Harush and his family live in Shlomit, less than 5 miles from Gaza.
Immediately the security team did not think twice and got into the cars and drove to pre-gun.
When the Shlomit 11-man security team arrived, they engaged in fighting terrorists in pre-gun with no idea of what's happening around them.
For 2 hours, there was a heroic battle of the first response team with the 12 terrorists that we later on found out. The terrorists had maybe hundreds of grenades, ammunition, RPGs, side bombs. They had special kits to open bomb shelters, drills. They wanted to open the bomb shelters and basically massacre the entire community and then go to the next community and the next community.
As the team got the upper hand, terrorists ran away from the fight. While Pre-Gan suffered no losses and the surrounding communities were saved, their rescuers were not so fortunate.
Unfortunately, we paid a heavy price. 4 of our best guys, brothers, neighbors, friends, were killed during this battle. And in one moment, we had 15 new orphans that joined the community and 4 widows from this attack.
Harush then remembered he had a drone back home.
I was able to guide the helicopter that was brought from the IDF. At some point, the IDF called us and they asked us to guide them where there are terrorists around, and they were shooting towards the areas where we told them there were terrorists.
The community evacuated to the field school at Kfar Etzion, which carries its own place in history.
Kfar Etzion is a place that in 1948 fought a heroic battle themselves and was evacuated to Jerusalem. And 19 years later, they came here after the Six-Day War. I myself was evacuated from the Gaza Strip as a child, as a 17-year-old boy. And coming here and being a refugee again felt a lot like what we felt after we left Gaza.
That happened in 2005 when Israel uprooted 21 Israeli communities from the Gaza Strip and 4 in the West Bank as a move towards peace. The decision, however, eventually enabled Hamas to take over Gaza. Harush has now been drafted into the reserves. He said he's thinking about going back to Shlomit.
And with the support of our friends from the Jewish National Fund, we'll be able to rebuild everything that was destroyed.
As for the day after the war, Harush says the message is clear.
We're the Jewish people. We prevailed and managed to come out of many horrific attacks, pogroms, Holocaust, Egypt, and we will be able to come out of this as strong as we can.
Even in the adversity, Harush sees God's hand at work.
Everything that God does, He does for the best. This is the faith that many of my community have. We don't know how it's going to roll, but it's going to come out very, very good. And God wants us united. I call it the war of unity, because when we are united, nobody can do anything to us.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Kfar Etzion, Judea.
Still ahead, there are reports Hamas's brutal attacks have been coming out ever since October 7th, and for many people, they can be difficult to handle. We're going to hear about ways that you can learn to deal with these difficult stories. It's coming up right after this. Stories of the terror attacks on October 7th in Israel fill the headlines for weeks, and we are still hearing more about the horrors committed by Hamas. For many, it can be a lot to process, and mental health experts say while it's not unusual to feel traumatized, you don't have to stay that way. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson says there are a number of ways to protect yourself while also still staying informed.
We're the light of the world, and the world needs some light right now.
Dr. Jennifer Longren says Christians can learn to demonstrate resilience while hearing or learning about tragedy.
It's okay to experience hard feelings and to struggle and to suffer. Those are human experiences, but you don't have to stay there.
She points to God's word as a way to deal with chaos, evil, and uncertainty.
To really use it as an opportunity to come closer to Him and to reconnect and to search the scriptures and really see what He does say and to see the promises that are laid out for us. We'll have this abundance and this joy and this peace, but at the same time we'll have struggle. So it's kind of seeing them operating in harmony.
Dr. Longren offers Bible-based directives like guarding your mind, which she says means to avoid taking in too much bad news.
And it's not to pretend like it's not existing, but it's to be very intentional with how it affects our health and how we put limits on it.
That could include staying away from news broadcasts or scrolling just before bed and other critical times.
Don't check your email in bed first thing. Don't look at your phone first thing in the morning. I would say have some sort of prayer or ritual in how you start your day.
Another tip, in everything, give thanks, which could involve a gratitude journal.
An interesting thing about gratitude is that it's neurobiologically impossible to feel gratitude and anxiety at the same time.
Love your neighbor, which can mean offering a helping hand.
Yes, service. And it's such a beautiful thing that's talked about in the Bible. And in psychology, they're saying, wow, this is really good for our brain.
Or just spending time with others.
Having game nights and having fun together with a community. You know, just connecting with other people is such a strong determinant of health.
And finally, practice forgiveness.
Kind of in reflection of how God shows us his grace and his mercy, that we'll have better health outcomes and mental health outcomes as a result.
So while it's only natural to struggle emotionally with tragic news and war, ancient scripture offers guidance about maintaining positive mental health in today's modern world. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Coming back with an encouraging word for your day ahead. Stay with us. Time now for your Wednesday word, and today I want to leave you with this. There are 5 words I read following an interview at the home of recording artist Amy Grant. She has them posted on her refrigerator. Be gentle with each other. And in this time of strife, difficult news, differences of all kinds, they're important to remember. Have a soft heart and be kind and gentle with each other. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I'll remind you can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online. That address is cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us. The address to do that is newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We certainly would love to hear from you. Make this a wonderful Wednesday. Come back and see us tomorrow.